In every family, love is meant to be the bond that endures through hardship and time. Yet, when greed and selfishness take root, even the strongest ties can unravel. This story follows the quiet suffering of Margaret Lee, a widowed mother who spent her entire life working tirelessly to raise her children and keep her household together. She dreamed of a day when her sacrifices would be honored, when her children would surround her with warmth and respect. But the reality she faces is far different. Instead of gratitude, she receives coldness. Instead of unity, she is met with bitter arguments and betrayal. Her children, blinded by the lure of wealth and inheritance, treat her not as a mother but as an obstacle to be removed. What begins as small slights soon grows into open cruelty. Relatives whisper, neighbors judge, and Margaret finds herself trapped in her own home, the very place she once built as a haven of love. Yet, beneath her quiet exterior lies a strength her children cannot see, and when the truth comes to light, it will shake the family to its core. Margaret Lee's hands were worn and lined from years of labor, but they still moved gracefully as she kneaded dough on the wooden counter. The scent of fresh bread filled the small kitchen, wrapping the house in warmth. It was early morning, the hour she loved most before the house woke, before the noise of disappointment and demands filled her ears. Her home stood on the edge of town, an old but sturdy two-story house her late husband Edward had built with his own hands. Each brick carried his memory, each beam whispered of sacrifices made for the family. Margaret had guarded the house like a treasure chest, believing it would one day be the inheritance her children cherished. Her three children, however, did not see the house with the same eyes. Daniel, the eldest, was a businessman always chasing after new ventures, his pride swollen with ambition, but his debts hidden beneath a polished smile. Lydia, the middle child, had inherited Edward's sharp tongue, but none of his humility. She measured life in material comforts and the approval of others. And Thomas, the youngest, seemed lost, drifting from one plan to another, rarely pausing to consider his mother's quiet devotion. That morning, Margaret set three places at the table, though she knew better than to expect gratitude. Daniel arrived first, his phone pressed to his ear, speaking in clipped tones about investments and profits. He barely nodded at his mother as he sat down. "Daniel," Margaret said gently, setting a plate of eggs before him. "Eat something before your day begins. You work too hard." He waved dismissively, not even glancing at the food. "I don't have time for this, Mom. I've got calls to make." "You wouldn't understand." Margaret lowered her eyes, swallowing the sting of his words. Lydia swept in next, her heels clicking against the floor. She looked around the kitchen with a critical eye. "Honestly, Mother, when will you fix these curtains? They look so outdated. If people knew how you lived, they'd think we were peasants." Margaret forced a smile. "They are clean, Lydia. They've served us well." Lydia sniffed and sat down, scrolling through her phone without another word. Finally, Thomas came, yawning, his hair tousled. He slumped into a chair. "Is there coffee?" Margaret quickly poured him a cup. "Of course, dear." He took it without thanks, already distracted by the newspaper. As they sat in silence, Margaret watched them, her heart heavy. Once, they had been children who clung to her skirts, eager for bedtime stories and kisses goodnight. Now, they were adults who barely saw her as more than a servant. She broke the silence softly. "Your father would be proud to see you all grown. He dreamed that this house would be the heart of our family forever." Daniel scoffed, finally putting down his phone. "Father's dreams won't pay bills, Mom. The land this house sits on is worth a fortune. You're wasting it, living here like a hermit. If you sold it, we could all have something better." Lydia chimed in, her voice sharp. "Daniel's right. You're clinging to the past. What use is this creaky house to you now? You're getting older, Mother. Wouldn't it be better to move into a smaller place, somewhere easier to manage?" Thomas muttered without looking up. "Or at least give us part of it. We could use the money." Margaret's breath caught. "Give." You part of it? Daniel leaned forward, his eyes cold. Yes, it's not like you need all of it. Think of it as an early inheritance. Why wait? The words struck Margaret like blows. She looked from one child to the next, searching for a flicker of kindness, but found none. My dears, she whispered, her voice trembling, this house, it is all I have left of your father. Every wall holds his memory. I am not ready to let it go. Lydia rolled her eyes. Always the sentiment. Honestly, Mother, sometimes I think you value bricks and wood more than you value us. Tears stung Margaret's eyes, but she held them back. I value you more than life itself. That is why I have worked so hard, so long. But must you speak so cruelly? Daniel stood, buttoning his jacket. We're only being practical. If you won't listen now, you'll regret it later. He left the kitchen, his phone already back at his ear. Lydia followed, muttering about wasted opportunities. Thomas lingered only long enough to finish his coffee before slipping out without a word. Margaret sat alone at the table, the food untouched, her heart aching. The house felt colder now, despite the warmth of the oven. She folded her hands and whispered a prayer. Edward, if you can hear me, give me strength. Our children are blind to love. They see only money. How did it come to this? Her words dissolved into the quiet of the house, the only answer the ticking of the clock on the wall. Yet in her heart, a seed of strength began to stir. She did not know it yet, but the cruelty of that morning was only the beginning. Darker days lay ahead, days of betrayal, humiliation, and heartbreak. But Margaret would endure, for within her burned a quiet fire her children had long forgotten. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Margaret opened an old wooden chest in her room. Inside lay a bundle of letters Edward had written during their early years together. She pressed them to her chest, her tears falling freely now. They think me weak, she whispered. But Edward, I will show them. When the time comes, I will not be silent. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying the promise of storms yet to come. The days that followed brought little comfort to Margaret. The house was full of voices, yet it felt emptier than ever. Her children came and went, always in a rush, always with demands, rarely with love. One Saturday morning, Margaret rose early to prepare a large breakfast. Pancakes, fruit, and bacon filled the table, Edward's old favorite, the meal she hoped would remind her children of happier days. She hummed softly as she worked, her heart clinging to the fragile hope that this time they might pause, might smile, might see her effort as love. But when Daniel came downstairs, he barely glanced at the food. Mom, he said briskly, adjusting his tie, I need you to co-sign a loan for me. Margaret froze, the spatula in her hand trembling. A loan? Daniel, what for? A new investment, a sure thing. His eyes gleamed, but there was a restless edge beneath them. I just need your signature. With the house as collateral, the bank will approve it. Margaret's stomach dropped. The house? Daniel, this is our home. Your father built it with his hands. I cannot risk it for a gamble. Daniel's jaw tightened. It's not a gamble. It's business. Don't you trust me? I trust you, my son. But I do not trust debt. Please, find another way. Daniel muttered under his breath, anger flashing across his face. You're holding me back, Mother, just like always. He stormed out, leaving the food untouched. Not long after, Lydia appeared, her heels clicking on the floor, her perfume strong enough to fill the room. She looked at the spread and smirked. Mother, really? Bacon and pancakes? Do you know what these do to the waistline? No wonder you still dress like it's the last century. Margaret's heart pinched. I thought perhaps we could eat together, as a family, like we used to. Lydia rolled her eyes. I don't have time for sentiment. I have lunch with friends today. But before I go, I need you to lend me some money. There's a new boutique opening, and if I don't keep up appearances, people will think we're poor. Margaret blinked. Lydia, I have little enough saved. I cannot give you money for dresses when bills must be paid. Lydia's expression turned sharp. Bills? Mother, people already whisper that we're falling behind. If you cared about our reputation, you'd help me, but you never listen. You care more about your dusty curtains than about us looking respectable. Her words sliced deep. Without waiting for an answer, Lydia grabbed her purse and swept out, leaving only the echo of her contempt behind. Thomas was last to stumble in. Half awake, his shirt wrinkled. He plopped into a chair, eyeing the pancakes with mild interest. Finally, something decent, he muttered, piling food onto his plate. Margaret watched, her heart clinging to the smallest shred of hope. Thomas, I'm glad you're eating. Tell me, how are your plans going? Have you found steady work yet? Thomas shrugged, his mouth full. Not yet. But I've been thinking, maybe I'll start a business. With a little money to get it off the ground, I could make something of myself. Margaret tilted her head. What kind of business, dear? He waved his fork vaguely. Does it matter? Something with quick returns. That's where you come in, Mom. If you just loan me part of your savings. Her heart sank. Thomas, all of you, asking for money, asking for the house. Do you not see how heavy this is for me? Thomas frowned. You've had it easy, Mother. We're the ones struggling. You sit here with Father's house, Father's land, Father's savings. We deserve some of it now. Why should we wait until you're gone? The words stung more deeply than he realized. Margaret set her hands in her lap, her eyes glistening. Because I am still alive, Thomas. Does my life mean so little to you? For a moment, Thomas looked uncomfortable. But instead of apologizing, he shoveled another bite of pancake into his mouth, muttering, You always make it about yourself. When at last the house was quiet again, Margaret sat alone at the table, the food grown cold. Her tears spilled freely now, her chest aching with a grief heavier than widowhood. Edward, she whispered into the silence, our children do not see me. They see only what I can give them. Have I failed them, or have they failed me? She gathered the untouched plates, placing them carefully in the sink. Each clatter of porcelain against porcelain sounded like a crack in her heart. That evening, she visited the old oak tree in the backyard, the place where Edward used to sit and read aloud while the children played at his feet. She ran her hand over the bark, remembering laughter that once filled the yard. She knelt in the grass and whispered, I will endure, for though they treat me unfairly, I will not let bitterness poison me. But Edward, I fear darker days are coming. If they can speak to me this way now, what will stop them from taking everything when the time comes? The wind rustled through the branches, carrying her words into the twilight. Margaret closed her eyes, breathing in the cool air. Somewhere deep inside her, a fire sparked small, but steady. Her children might see her as weak, but they would learn in time that Margaret Lee was far stronger than they knew. The following week, Margaret attended a neighborhood gathering at Mrs. Wong's house. It was a modest affair: tea, pastries, and chatter among women who had known one another for decades. Margaret hoped for a reprieve from her worries, a chance to breathe in kindness. But even there, her children's shadows followed her. As the women sat in a circle, Lydia's sharp voice cut through the room. She had arrived uninvited, her silk scarf tossed carelessly over her shoulder. Honestly, she said with a laugh, Mother insists on clinging to that old house like it's a palace. You should see it curtains from the last century. Furniture so worn it could collapse. We've begged her to sell and move somewhere sensible, but she refuses, stubborn as always. The women exchanged uneasy glances. Margaret's cheeks flushed, her teacup trembling in her hand. Lydia, she said softly, this isn't the place. But Lydia continued, her smile mocking. You'd think after Father passed, she'd want to make life easier for herself. But no. She insists on living like some relic. And of course, who has to pick up the pieces? Us. A ripple of uncomfortable laughter filled the room. Margaret lowered her eyes, the sting of humiliation burning deeper than any insult spoken within her home. That evening, back at the farmhouse, Margaret confronted her daughter. "Lydia," she said firmly, her voice shaking with emotion, "why would you shame me in front of our neighbors?" Lydia shrugged. "It wasn't shaming, Mother. It was honesty. People should know what we're dealing with." Margaret's eyes glistened. "What you're dealing with?" "Lydia, it is I who bear the burden of cooking, cleaning, paying bills, keeping this house alive, and yet you make me a spectacle." Lydia sighed impatiently. "You don't understand. Appearances matter. If people think we're poor or backward, it reflects badly on all of us. I was only protecting our name. By dragging mine through the dirt," Margaret whispered, "your father would never forgive such cruelty." For the first time, Lydia's confident mask faltered. But she said nothing, only turned away with a flick of her scarf, leaving Margaret trembling with anger and grief. The days grew colder, and with them, the atmosphere in the house. Daniel returned late at night, often reeking of drink, muttering curses about failed business deals. Thomas grew more restless, his eyes always calculating, his words edged with resentment. Lydia visited often, not for love, but for money or favors. One evening, Daniel slammed a pile of bills onto the kitchen table. "Do you see this, Mother?" he demanded. "Debt collectors. They'll ruin me if I don't pay. And all because you refuse to do the sensible thing, sell this house." Margaret flinched. "Daniel, this house is not just walls and wood. It is your father's legacy. Must you destroy even that?" Daniel's voice rose. "Legacy won't feed us. Legacy won't pay debts. You're clinging to a corpse of the past while we're drowning in the present." Margaret's hands shook as she gathered the bills. "I will find a way to help you, but not by giving up this house. Please, my son, do not ask me again." Daniel's face hardened. "Then you're choosing bricks over blood." He stormed out, the slam of the door rattling through the house like thunder. Later that night, Margaret overheard whispers in the living room. Daniel and Lydia sat close together, their voices low but sharp. "She'll never agree willingly," Daniel muttered. "Then we'll make her," Lydia replied coldly. "She can't fight us forever. We'll wear her down." Margaret stood frozen in the hallway, her heart pounding. Each word was a dagger, her own children plotting against her, speaking of her as though she were an obstacle, not a mother. She pressed a hand to her chest, whispering, "Edward, give me strength. The storm has begun." The following Sunday, Margaret attended church, seeking solace in prayer. But even there, whispers followed her. "Poor woman," someone muttered behind her. "She's too old to keep such a house. Her children must be desperate. Imagine how hard it is for them." Margaret bowed her head, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. The injustice cut deeply. Not only were her children ungrateful, they were twisting the community against her. After the service, the pastor approached her kindly. "Mrs. Lee, if you ever need counsel, my door is open. Sometimes, family can be the heaviest cross we bear." Margaret managed a faint smile. "Thank you, Pastor. Pray that I have strength to carry it." That evening, as twilight painted the farmhouse in shades of gold, Margaret sat alone at the dining table. She spread before her Edward's letters, her only refuge from despair. In one, his words leapt from the page. "If ever the world turns against you, Margaret, remember, truth is stronger than lies, and love is stronger than greed. Stand firm, my dear, and do not let them take from you what is yours." Margaret pressed the letter to her chest, her tears falling onto the paper. "They will not break me, Edward," she whispered. "I will endure. And when the time comes, I will show them that a mother's love is not weakness, it is strength." The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. But within Margaret's heart, a fire grew stronger. Her children had humiliated her, betrayed her trust, and turned the community's whispers against her. Yet she would not bow. Not yet. The first frost of winter settled on the ground when Margaret discovered the betrayal. She had risen early, as always, to fetch firewood from the shed. But as she stepped into the yard, she noticed something unusual: strangers near the fence, measuring tape in hand, pointing toward the house. Margaret hurried closer, her shawl tight around her shoulders. "Excuse me," she called, her voice trembling. "What are you doing on my property?" One of the men straightened, clipboard in hand. "We're here to appraise the land, ma'am. Your son asked us to take measurements." Her heart dropped. "My son? Daniel?" "Yes, ma'am. He said you were preparing to sell." Margaret's breath caught. "That's a lie. I never agreed to sell." The men exchanged awkward glances. "We're just doing our job. If there's been a mistake, you should speak to your son." Margaret turned away, her chest heaving, fury rising with each step back to the house. Inside, Daniel sat at the kitchen table, casually sipping coffee. "Daniel," Margaret burst out, her voice shaking. "How dare you? Sending men to appraise the house without my consent?" Daniel didn't flinch. "It's called being proactive, Mother. You're too sentimental to make the right choice. I'm doing it for all of us." Margaret's hands clenched at her sides. "For all of us? Or for yourself?" Daniel leaned back, his expression cold. "What difference does it make? The house is wasted on you. You cling to it like a child with a toy when it could save us all." Margaret's voice cracked. "It is not a toy. It is your father's legacy, my life's work. How dare you treat it as though it were yours to give away?" Daniel slammed his cup onto the table, coffee spilling. "You're standing in the way of progress. One day you'll see I was right." Later that week, another blow came. Margaret visited the local market, hoping to buy flour and eggs. As she reached for her purse, she discovered the bills she had carefully saved were gone. Her face paled. She had counted them that very morning. When she returned home, she found Thomas lounging in the living room, whistling as he sorted through new clothes. "Thomas," she whispered, dread curling in her stomach. "Where did you get these?" He shrugged. "Bought them." "With what money?" His eyes flicked away. "Does it matter?" Margaret's voice trembled. "Did you take from my purse?" Thomas bristled. "Don't accuse me." "Thomas, answer me." Finally, he muttered, "You weren't using it, and I needed it more than you." Margaret's knees weakened. "That was for groceries, for the house. How could you?" He avoided her gaze, mumbling, "You'll survive. You always do." Then he walked out, leaving her crumbling in the quiet. That night, Lydia came home from a party, her perfume filling the air. Margaret, still shaken, begged her daughter for comfort. "Lydia, your brothers, they've turned against me. I am afraid of what they will do next." But Lydia only sighed, adjusting her earrings in the mirror. "You're being dramatic, Mother. Daniel is right, you're too attached to that old house. And Thomas, well, he's just desperate. Stop acting like a victim." Margaret's voice broke. "I am your mother. Do you feel nothing for me?" Lydia turned, her eyes sharp. "Feel? I feel trapped. Everyone looks at me like I'm the daughter of a stubborn old woman who refuses to move on. You're embarrassing me, Mother. If you just give up the house, all of this would end." Margaret stared at her daughter in disbelief. The words cut deeper than knives. That evening, she sat alone in her room. Edward's letters spread across her lap. Her tears blurred the ink, but one line seemed to glow through the haze. "When the ones you love betray you, do not forget who you are. You are more than their cruelty. You are the keeper of truth." Margaret whispered into the stillness, "Edward, they see me as weak. But I will endure. I will not let them strip me of everything. Even if I must stand alone, I will stand." She closed the letters, her trembling hands steadying. Days turned into weeks, and the distance between Margaret and her children grew wider. Daniel spoke only of money, Lydia only of appearances, Thomas only of his own needs. The community, influenced by Lydia's gossip, began to see Margaret as difficult, stubborn, even selfish. Invitations dwindled, smiles turned brittle, and whispers followed her wherever she went. Yet through it all, Margaret rose each morning, tended her house, and prayed in silence. Though her heart bled, her spirit refused to bend. One evening, as snow fell softly outside, she gathered her children around the fire. Her voice was quiet, but each word carried weight. "My dear ones," she said, "I have given you life, love, and years of labor, yet you repay me with scorn and greed. You take my money, you plot against my home, you humiliate me before others. But hear me now. I will not be broken. This house is not yours to claim. My dignity is not yours to steal. And though you are my children, you will learn love is not weakness. Love is strength." The flames crackled, casting long shadows across the room. Her children shifted uncomfortably, but none spoke. Margaret's gaze burned as she whispered, "Remember these words. For one day the truth will rise, and you will see the cost of what you have done." Winter deepened, and with it, Margaret's loneliness. The house, once filled with laughter and warmth, echoed only with quarrels and accusations. One evening, Margaret prepared a simple stew, hoping to gather her children around the table. She remembered how Edward used to bless the meal, his voice steady, his eyes shining with pride for their family. But now, as the stew simmered, Margaret's heart ached with doubt. When the children arrived, the tension was immediate. Daniel dropped a pile of envelopes onto the table. "Final notices," he said flatly. "The creditors won't wait much longer. Mother, you need to act." Margaret stirred the pot, her hands trembling. "Daniel, I cannot sell this house. It is all I have." Daniel's face darkened. "All you have? And what about us? Do you even care that we're drowning?" Lydia scoffed, tossing her scarf onto a chair. "She doesn't care, Daniel. She clings to her little shrine of memories while we suffer. Honestly, Mother, it's selfish." Margaret's eyes widened. "Selfish? After all I've given you? Every coin I earned, every hour I worked, every sacrifice I made, and you call me selfish?" Thomas leaned back, smirking. "You're dramatic, Mother. If you loved us, you'd make things easier. Sign the papers, and all of this ends." Margaret's voice broke. "You speak as though I am already gone. Do you not see that I am still here? Your mother, flesh and blood, standing before you?" The room fell silent for a moment, her words hanging heavy in the air. But Daniel broke it with a bitter laugh. "You make this harder than it needs to be. We could all be living better lives right now. Instead, you chain us to your grief and stubbornness." Margaret gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. "I chain no one. You are free to live as you wish. But do not expect me to destroy the home your father built. Not for your debts, not for your vanity, not for anything." Her children stared at her, their faces cold, their eyes unyielding. Days later, the cruelty turned sharper. Margaret went to the market again, hoping to buy a small treat for herself, a jar of honey she had been saving for. But as she reached the stall, she overheard two women whispering. "Poor Mrs. Lee," one said. "Her children say she's losing her mind." "Yes," the other replied. "Lydia told me she forgets things, mismanages money, refuses to make sensible decisions. Such a burden to them." Margaret froze, her face flushing hot. Her hand shook as she placed the honey back on the shelf and walked away, her heart pounding. Her own daughter had spread lies, lies that painted her as senile, unstable, unfit. The humiliation burned through her like fire. That evening, she confronted Lydia. "Why?" Margaret asked, her voice trembling with fury. "Why would you tell people I've lost my mind?" Lydia arched a brow. "Because you're making us look foolish, Mother. Refusing to sell, refusing to move. People need to understand why. It's easier if they think you're just confused." Margaret's hands tightened at her sides. "Confused? I am not confused. I am your mother, and I know exactly what I am doing. You shame me before the town. You twist their sympathy to your favor, and you dare call it easier? Lydia's lips curved in a cold smile. Sometimes, mother, the truth doesn't matter. Perception does. And right now, everyone sees you as a stubborn old woman. That works for us. Margaret's heart broke anew. She realized then that Lydia's betrayal was not careless, it was calculated. Not long after, Daniel returned with more papers. Sign these, he demanded, thrusting them toward her. Margaret shook her head. Number. Read them, at least, Daniel snapped. I do not need to read lies, she replied. Daniel's temper flared. He slammed his fist onto the table. You're ruining everything! Do you think Father would want this? For us to suffer while you rot in that chair? Margaret's eyes blazed. Do not speak of your father. He worked himself to the bone so this house would stand. He dreamed that it would shelter us for generations. And you dare to use his name to justify your greed? Daniel's face twisted with anger. For a moment, Margaret thought he might strike her. But he only turned, muttering curses, and stormed out. Thomas, too, grew bolder in his ingratitude. One night, Margaret discovered a drawer rifled through, her small jewelry box missing. She confronted him in the hallway. Thomas, where is it? He avoided her gaze. I don't know what you're talking about. Your father's watch, my wedding ring gone. Tell me where they are. Thomas's jaw tightened. I sold them. Margaret staggered back as though struck. You sold them? They were not yours to take. They weren't doing you any good, Thomas muttered. At least now they're worth something. Margaret's voice broke into a sob. They were all I had left of your father. But Thomas only walked away, leaving her crumbling in the hallway. Alone in her room that night, Margaret wept into Edward's letters. My love, she whispered, they stripped me piece by piece. First my dignity, now my memories. What more will they take? How much more can I endure? Yet, even as her tears fell, something fierce awakened within her. The betrayals cut deep, but they also sharpened her resolve. They will not destroy me, she murmured. Not while breath remains in my body. She closed the letters and lit a single candle, its flame steady and bright. Outside, the winter wind howled. But inside, Margaret Lee's spirit stood unbowed. Though her children waged war against her, she would not surrender. The conflict had only begun. The snow outside thickened into heavy drifts, but inside the farmhouse, the chill came not from the weather, it came from the voices of Margaret's children. They arrived one evening, uninvited, their faces tight with purpose. Daniel carried more papers, Lydia her cold smile, and Thomas trailed behind, avoiding his mother's eyes. Margaret greeted them at the door, her shawl drawn tight around her shoulders. What is it now? She asked softly, already weary. Daniel didn't waste time. We've spoken to a lawyer. If you won't sign willingly, there are other ways. Oh, Margaret's breath caught. Other ways? What do you mean? Lydia's tone was sharp. Guardianship, mother. If the court believes you're unfit to manage your affairs, they can appoint one of us to take charge. Then the house will no longer be your burden. The words struck Margaret like ice. She clutched the door frame for support. Unfit? I have managed this house for decades. I raised you, clothed you, fed you. Daniel interrupted, his voice cold. That was then. Now you're old, confused, clinging to memories. People already whisper about it. We're only protecting you from yourself. Margaret's knees trembled. Protecting me? You mean stealing from me? For a long moment, the room was silent, except for the crackle of the fire. Then Margaret's voice rose, steadier than before. You may call me weak, you may call me stubborn, but you will not call me unfit. I know exactly what you are doing, circling me like vultures, waiting for me to fall. But I am not fallen yet. Lydia rolled her eyes. You can make speeches all you want. It won't change the truth. The community already thinks you're slipping. Margaret's heart ached. Because you planted that poison. You spread your lies until even my neighbors doubt me. Daniel gathered the papers, his jaw tight. Think it over. If you don't cooperate, we'll move forward without you. They left, their footsteps echoing down the hall, leaving Margaret standing alone, her chest heavy with grief. The following Sunday, Margaret returned to church, hoping for comfort. But as she entered, conversations hushed. She felt the weight of their stares, their pity thinly disguised. After the service, Mrs. Chen approached, her voice hushed. Margaret, dear, if you ever need help making decisions, I know people who could advise you. It must be hard at your age. Margaret forced a smile, though her hands trembled. I am not helpless, Mrs. Chen. But thank you. As she walked home, snow crunching beneath her boots, her tears fell silently. Even the sanctuary of church no longer offered peace. That evening, Margaret sat by the fire, Edward's letters in her lap. Her voice trembled as she read aloud. If the world turns its back, do not despair. For truth will rise, even if buried beneath lies. Hold fast, my love, and know that dignity is the shield no one can take. She pressed the letter to her heart. Edward, I will hold fast. But how much longer must I stand alone? The answer came the very next day. Thomas stumbled into the kitchen, his face pale, his hands shaking. Margaret rushed to him. What is it, my son? Are you ill? He slumped into a chair. I owe money, more than I can pay. They'll come for me, mother. I don't know what to do. Margaret's heart broke at the sight of him. Despite all his betrayals, he was still her child. She touched his hand gently. We will find a way. But stealing from me, lying to me, that is not the way. Thomas's eyes filled with tears. I was desperate. I'm sorry. I thought you'd understand. Margaret's voice softened. I do understand. I know what it is to be desperate. But you must see. Thomas, I am not your enemy. I am your mother. For a moment, Thomas's face crumpled, and Margaret saw a glimpse of the boy he once was. But then he pulled away, muttering, You could fix everything if you just let go of the house. The fragile moment of remorse shattered, leaving Margaret hollow. That night, as wind howled outside, Margaret found herself standing in the parlor before Edward's portrait. His eyes, kind and steady, seemed to look into hers. My love, she whispered, they want to strip me of everything. They would even drag me before a court, declare me unfit, erase my voice. But I will not let them. I will endure. For you. For the truth. She lifted her chin, her frail frame seeming taller in the firelight. They think me powerless. They will learn otherwise. But even as her resolve strengthened, the cruelty of her children grew. A few nights later, Margaret overheard Daniel and Lydia in the hallway, their voices low but clear. She'll never give in, Daniel muttered. Then we'll force her hand, Lydia replied. We'll tell the lawyer she's lost her memory, that she forgets bills and conversations. People already believe it. The court will side with us. Margaret pressed a hand to her mouth, her heart pounding. She had heard enough. She stepped into the hall, her eyes blazing. I forget nothing. Do you hear me? Nothing. I know every word you've spoken, every lie you've told, every cruelty you've shown. And one day, the truth will burn through your deceit. Daniel and Lydia stared, startled, but neither spoke. Margaret's voice shook with fury. I am your mother. You may betray me, humiliate me, even steal from me, but you will not silence me. Without another word, she turned and walked away, her steps slow but steady. That night, as she sat alone in her room, Margaret opened her journal and wrote, They circle me like wolves. They call me weak, unfit, confused. But I see more clearly than ever. Their greed blinds them, but truth is my lantern. I will not bow. I will not break. The day will come when their cruelty is revealed, and I will be ready. She closed the journal, the candlelight flickering across her face. Though her children plotted in shadows, Margaret's fire burned brighter. The conflict was no longer hidden, it was war. The snow melted into slush as spring crept into the valley, but inside Margaret's heart, winter raged colder than ever. Her children's greed no longer lingered in whispers. It grew bold, shameless, and cruel. One morning, Margaret walked into the village square to fetch supplies. As she passed the bakery, she caught fragments of conversation. "Such a shame about Mrs. Lee," the baker's wife whispered. "Yes," another replied. "I heard from Lydia herself. The poor woman forgets her own children's names sometimes. And Daniel says she misplaces bills, doesn't pay them. They're worried she'll burn the house down one day." Margaret froze mid-step, her breath caught, her heart pounding. Lies, all lies, yet spoken as truth, repeated until the town believed them. She turned quickly and hurried home, her groceries forgotten. By the time she reached the farmhouse, tears streamed down her cheeks. She collapsed into a chair, clutching her shawl around her. "They have stripped me of my good name," she whispered. "Even my neighbors see me as a fool." That evening, when Lydia came to the house, Margaret confronted her. "Why?" Margaret demanded, her voice shaking. "Why do you spread these lies about me? That I forget your names, that I cannot pay bills, that I am losing my mind?" Lydia didn't flinch. She set her purse on the table and removed her gloves with exaggerated care. "Because, Mother, it makes things easier. People pity you. They expect us to take charge. No one questions it when we say the house should be managed by us instead of you." Margaret's eyes blazed with tears. "Do you not see what you have done? You've turned my friends against me. You've made me a stranger in my own community." Lydia's tone was cold. "Your pride is the problem, not me. Let it go, Mother. Give us the house, and this will all end." Margaret's voice cracked. "End? Number. This is the beginning of shame you will carry forever." The cruelty deepened. Weeks later, Daniel brought a banker to the farmhouse. Margaret opened the door to find the stranger smiling politely, his hat in hand. "Mrs. Lee," he said, "I understand you're ready to discuss transferring the property. Your son assured me you were prepared." Margaret's heart nearly stopped. She turned on Daniel, her voice trembling with fury. "How dare you bring this man here under false pretenses?" Daniel held up his hands, feigning calm. "Mother, don't embarrass yourself. The bank is ready to help us. This is your chance to do the right thing." Margaret's voice rose, sharp as steel. "The right thing? The right thing is to honor your father's memory. The right thing is to respect your mother. And yet, you drag strangers into my home, as though I were too feeble to speak for myself." The banker stammered. "Perhaps I should come back another time." He quickly excused himself, leaving Daniel scowling. Margaret faced her son squarely. "You will not deceive me, Daniel. Nor will you trick me into handing you what you crave." Daniel's voice darkened. "One day, you'll regret this stubbornness." That night, Margaret wrote in her journal by candlelight. "Their lies spread like smoke, suffocating me. Yet I must not let them choke my spirit. Edward, if you could see your children now. But I will not surrender. I will guard your legacy, even if it costs me everything." Her hand trembled, but her resolve did not. The betrayal struck even closer to home days later. Margaret discovered that Thomas, desperate again for money, had borrowed from dangerous men in town. They came to the farmhouse while she was alone, pounding on the door. "Where's your son?" one snarled. "He owes us, and if he won't pay, maybe his mother can." Margaret's heart thudded. She stood firm, though her body shook. "Leave this place. You'll have nothing from me." The men sneered but eventually left, muttering threats. Margaret sank against the door, tears spilling. "Edward, our children. They dragged me into darkness I never chose." When Thomas returned later, She confronted him, her voice breaking. Your recklessness has put me in danger. Strangers pounding at my door, demanding money. How could you bring this upon me? Thomas looked ashamed for a moment, but then shrugged. You could solve it if you just sold the house. Margaret's heart cracked again. Even you, Thomas. Is there no end to your greed? The cruelty climaxed at a family dinner weeks later. Lydia had insisted they all dine at a local restaurant to show the town we are a respectable family. Margaret reluctantly agreed, praying for peace. But midway through the meal, Lydia raised her glass and said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. To our dear mother, who tries her best, though her memory isn't what it once was. The table laughed Daniel, Lydia, even Thomas chuckled nervously. The sound echoed in Margaret's ears like knives. Her cheeks burned as the other diners turned to look at her with pity. She gripped the table edge, her voice trembling. How dare you? She whispered. Lydia smirked. Oh, Mother, it's just a joke. Don't be so sensitive. Margaret rose from her chair, her body trembling but her voice sharp. It is no joke to strip me of my dignity. It is no joke to make me a fool before strangers. You are my children, my flesh and blood, and you mock me as though I were nothing. The restaurant fell silent. Margaret's tears fell freely as she turned and walked out into the night. At home, she sat before the fireplace, Edward's portrait above her. They laugh at me, she whispered. Even in public. They steal from me, lie about me, plot against me, and yet I remain their mother. Why, Edward? Why does love tie me to those who wound me most? Her tears fell, but behind them, her anger burned bright. They believe me weak, but I am not weak. I will endure, and when the time comes, I will show them the truth. The flames crackled, reflecting in her eyes. Margaret Lee was battered, humiliated, betrayed, but not broken. The war within her family had reached a new pitch, and though her children believed victory was near, they had no idea of the strength their mother still held in silence. The weeks that followed the restaurant humiliation left Margaret shaken. She kept mostly to herself, venturing into the village only when necessary. Yet even then, she could feel the eyes of neighbors on her back, could hear the whispers ripple as she passed. Poor Mrs. Lee. She's losing her grip. Her children are only trying to help. A shame, really. She used to be so strong. Each word was like a stone, weighing heavier and heavier on her shoulders. One cold morning, Daniel arrived at the farmhouse, his jaw tight, papers tucked neatly in his briefcase. Lydia followed close behind, her heels clicking against the wood floor. Margaret was in the kitchen, folding laundry, when they entered without knocking. Mother, Daniel began briskly, we've filed a petition. Margaret looked up, her hands stilling. A petition? For what? Lydia's lips curved into a thin smile. For guardianship. The court will decide whether you're capable of managing your own affairs. Margaret's breath caught, the basket slipping from her hands. You would drag me before a court? Your own mother? Daniel's tone was cold, practiced. We have no choice. You're refusing to make rational decisions. The debts keep piling up. The house falls further into disrepair, and your reputation, well, you've heard the whispers. This is the only way to protect you. Margaret's voice broke. Protect me? You seek to strip me of everything, my dignity, my home, my voice. You call it protection, but it is betrayal. Lydia's eyes gleamed. Call it what you will, Mother. The judge will see what we see, a stubborn old woman unfit to handle her estate. Margaret's knees weakened, but she forced herself upright. If you take me to court, you will not face a broken woman. You will face a mother who remembers every sacrifice, every tear, every hour spent giving you life, and when the truth comes, it will not be me who stands ashamed. Her children exchanged a glance, but said nothing more. They turned and left, the echo of the door closing behind them sounding like a final blow. The day of the hearing arrived weeks later. Margaret dressed in her best, a plain but clean navy dress Edward had once admired. She stood tall, though her hands trembled. The courthouse was filled with townspeople, curious to witness the spectacle. When the judge called her name, she walked forward slowly, her shawl draped around her shoulders. Daniel and Lydia sat at one table, polished and confident, their lawyer by their side. Thomas sat in the back, shifting uneasily, unwilling to take a side openly. The lawyer rose. "Your Honor, my clients are only concerned for their mother's welfare. She is elderly, forgetful, and unable to manage her affairs. The property she controls is too much for her. They only wish to ensure she is safe and cared for." Whispers rippled through the courtroom. Margaret's cheeks burned, her heart pounding. When it was her turn to speak, she rose, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "Your Honor," she began, "I am old, yes. My hands tremble, my eyes dim, but I am not confused. I have managed this house since my husband's passing. I have paid every bill, cooked every meal, and endured every cruelty my children have thrown upon me. If I am unfit, it is only because they have spread lies until even good people believe them." She turned, her eyes blazing at Daniel and Lydia. "They do not seek to protect me. They seek to take from me the home my husband built, the legacy of his blood and sweat. They call it love, but it is greed. They call it protection, but it is betrayal." Her words hung in the air. For a moment, silence filled the room, but the lawyer pressed on. "Your Honor, surely you can see the irrationality. She clings to an old house while her children suffer. She refuses every reasonable solution." The judge frowned, shuffling papers. "We will need further testimony." Neighbors were called. Some spoke kindly of Margaret, recalling her strength, her generosity, but others, poisoned by Lydia's whispers, described her as forgetful, confused, stubborn beyond reason. Each word chipped away at Margaret's defense, leaving her heart raw. Finally, Thomas was asked to speak. He hesitated, glancing between his mother and his siblings. "Thomas," the judge said, "what do you believe? Is your mother capable of managing her affairs?" The room held its breath. Thomas shifted, his voice uncertain. She's strong, stronger than they say. But," he swallowed, avoiding Margaret's eyes, "maybe she does need help." Margaret's heart shattered. Her own son, the boy she had cradled, nursed, forgiven 100 times, had spoken against her. She closed her eyes, her tears falling silently. The judge adjourned without a final ruling, requesting more evidence. But the damage was done. As Margaret walked from the courtroom, she felt the weight of pitying stares, the sting of whispered judgment. Outside, the wind bit cold against her cheeks. She pulled her shawl tighter, her steps slow but steady. Thomas hurried after her. "Mother, I didn't mean—" She stopped, her voice soft but sharp. "You meant enough. You stood with them, not with me. And that, Thomas, is a wound deeper than any court can inflict." He fell silent, shame clouding his face. Margaret walked on, her tears freezing against her skin. That night, she sat before Edward's portrait once more. "They humiliate me in public, Edward. They drag my name before judges, twist the truth until even our son doubts me. But hear me, I will not fall. I will not give them what they crave. This house, this legacy, will not be torn from me by lies." Her voice rose, fierce despite her tears. "Let them come with their papers, their lawyers, their whispers. I will endure. And one day, their masks will shatter, and the truth will burn brighter than their greed." She pressed Edward's letter to her heart, the firelight dancing in her eyes. Though the world seemed against her, Margaret Lee's spirit still stood, battered but unbroken. The courthouse humiliation clung to Margaret like a shadow. Everywhere she went, she felt the weight of judgmental stares, the sting of whispered pity. Even in the market, where she had once been greeted with warmth, She now found herself avoided, as though her presence were a burden. One afternoon, she overheard two young women by the fruit stall. Her children say she forgets everything, one said. Yes, the other whispered. I heard she can't even manage her own money. They say the court will take her house soon. Margaret's hands trembled as she placed the apples back onto the stall. She could not bear to hear more. The lies had spread so far that they had become her reputation. She walked home slowly, the cold air cutting into her lungs. Edward, she whispered, they are killing me with words. Not swords, not fists, but lies. When she returned home, another blow awaited. On the kitchen table sat an open letter addressed to Daniel. Margaret's eyes fell upon the words, regarding the pending sale of the Lee property. Her breath caught. She read further, her heart pounding. Daniel had already begun negotiations to sell the house without her consent, without her knowledge. The paper slipped from her trembling hands. Rage and grief surged within her. He would sell it as though I were already gone. That evening, when Daniel returned, Margaret confronted him. Daniel, she said, her voice sharp despite her shaking. What is this? She thrust the letter at him. Daniel glanced at it, unfazed. Business. The house is worth more now than ever. We'd be fools not to take advantage. Margaret's voice rose. It is not yours to sell. This house is mine. Your father's sweat built these walls. His hands shaped this wood. How dare you treat it as though it were a coin purse to be emptied? Daniel's jaw tightened. You think you can stop me? The law will side with us soon enough. You're only delaying the inevitable. Margaret's eyes glistened. If you do this, you will lose more than a house. You will lose your soul. Daniel turned away, muttering, My soul doesn't pay debts. But the cruelest act did not come from Daniel. It came from Lydia. Several nights later, Margaret awoke to a strange sound, drawers opening, footsteps in the hall. She rose from her bed, her shawl clutched around her, and followed the noise. There, in the parlor, Lydia stood with Margaret's keepsake chest open. Inside lay Edward's letters, his watch, and the family photographs Margaret treasured most. Lydia, Margaret gasped. What are you doing? Lydia turned, her face calm, almost smug. These are worth something. The watch, the old silver, even these letters collectors will pay for things like this. Margaret's heart stopped. Edward's letters? They are not for sale. Lydia shrugged. Everything has a price, Mother. You just refuse to see it. These papers mean nothing to anyone else. At least I can make them useful. Margaret's body shook. She stepped forward, her voice cracking with fury. You will not touch them. These are pieces of your father, his words, his memory, his love. How dare you? Lydia's smile faded, replaced by coldness. You're pathetic, Mother, clutching scraps of paper as though they'll bring him back. He's gone. All that matters now is survival. If you can't see that, then you're the fool everyone says you are. Margaret staggered back, her tears spilling. You would sell your father's memory for coins? Lydia closed the chest with a snap and swept out of the room, leaving Margaret trembling in the dark. The next morning, Margaret sat by the fire, Edward's letters clutched to her chest. She wept silently, her tears soaking the paper. My love, she whispered, even your words are not safe from them. They would strip me of everything, my home, my dignity, even my memories of you. How can a mother's heart endure such cruelty? Her sobs shook her thin frame. For the first time, she felt her strength falter. A terrible thought whispered at the edge of her mind. Perhaps they are right. Perhaps I am weak, foolish, clinging to ghosts. She buried her face in her hands, despair washing over her. That night, Thomas entered her room quietly. He found her sitting in the dark, the letters spread across her lap. Mother, he whispered, guilt heavy in his voice. I didn't know Lydia would stoop so low. I told her to stop, but she wouldn't listen. Margaret lifted her tear-streaked face. You knew? And you said nothing? Thomas lowered his eyes. I'm sorry. I'm a coward. I don't know how to fight them, but I don't want to see you hurt. Margaret's voice was weary. Yet you watched as they tore me apart. You stood silent when they dragged me to court, when they mocked me before the town. You call yourself my son, but you side with them through your silence. Thomas flinched, shame washing over him. I don't deserve your forgiveness. Margaret closed her eyes. Then earn it. Stand with me, Thomas. For once, stand with your mother. Thomas hesitated, torn between fear and guilt. Finally, he whispered, I'll try. Margaret's hand tightened around Edward's letters. For the first time in weeks, a flicker of hope stirred in her chest. But even as that fragile hope flickered, another blow struck. Days later, Margaret received a notice in the mail. The court date for the guardianship hearing had been set. She sat at the kitchen table, the paper trembling in her hand. Her children had moved swiftly, determined to strip her of everything. For a long while, she sat in silence, the house echoing with emptiness. Then, slowly, she rose and went to Edward's portrait. My love, she whispered, they think me broken. They think me beaten. But I will fight. I will not let them destroy what we built. I may be old, but I am not finished. When the time comes, they will see a mother's strength is not so easily crushed. Her eyes burned with new resolve. Though the cruelty of her children had nearly broken her, Margaret Lee would rise again. The day of the guardianship hearing dawned gray and heavy, the sky swollen with clouds. Margaret rose before the sun, her body weary but her spirit alert. She dressed carefully in her navy dress, pressed as neatly as her trembling hands could manage. Her shawl lay over her shoulders, a shield against the chill of both weather and judgment. She paused before Edward's portrait, her fingers brushing the frame. My love, she whispered, today they seek to silence me, but I will not be silenced. Whatever strength remains in me, I will spend it all to defend your legacy. With that, she straightened her back and walked out the door. The courthouse was crowded, more so than before. Curiosity had drawn the townsfolk, some out of sympathy, others for spectacle. Margaret felt their eyes on her as she entered. Daniel and Lydia already seated confidently at the petitioner's table, their lawyer shuffling papers with ease. Thomas sat in the back row, his head bowed, caught between guilt and fear. When Margaret took her place, a hush fell over the room. The judge entered, his gavel striking once. This court will now hear the case regarding the guardianship petition of Mrs. Margaret Lee. Daniel's lawyer stood first. His voice was smooth, practiced. Your Honor, this is not a case of malice, but of necessity. My clients, Daniel and Lydia Lee, only wish to ensure their mother's safety and well-being. She has demonstrated increasing confusion, an inability to manage her affairs, and a refusal to make rational decisions. The house she insists on keeping has become a burden, and her condition poses risks to herself and others. Murmurs filled the courtroom. Lydia nodded solemnly, her face carefully arranged to look pained, while Daniel maintained his air of calm authority. Margaret's stomach twisted. They painted themselves as saviors, while she stood cast as the frail villain. The lawyer continued, calling witnesses. Mrs. Chen, a neighbor, testified gently. I love Margaret, truly, but she has seemed forgetful lately. She repeats herself, and once she left her market bag behind. I worry about her. Another villager added. She refuses to let go of that old house, even though it drags everyone down. It's not normal. Each word was another stone laid against Margaret. Finally, Daniel and Lydia themselves spoke. My mother is stubborn, Daniel said, his voice steady. She refuses every practical solution. We fear for her safety. Lydia's tone was softer, but crueler for it. I love my mother dearly, but she isn't the same woman she used to be. We only want to protect her. Margaret clenched her hands in her lap, fury and grief burning within her. When it was her turn, she rose slowly, leaning on the table for support. Her voice trembled at first, but grew steadier as she spoke. Your Honor, I am not confused. I am not unfit. I am a mother betrayed by her children, and that is the truth of this case. The judge motioned for silence as whispers rippled through the room. Margaret pressed on. My husband, Edward, built our home with his own hands. I stood beside him, working, sacrificing, raising our children. That house is not just wood and stone, it is the memory of his love, the legacy of our family. And now my children seek to strip it from me, not out of care, but out of greed. Her eyes blazed as she turned toward Daniel and Lydia. They spread lies, saying, I forget names, misplace bills, lose my wits. They twist neighbors against me, humiliate me in public, even tried to sell the house without my consent. Is that protection, or is that betrayal? The courtroom was silent, every eye fixed on her. Margaret's voice broke, but she pressed on. I am old, yes. My hands tremble, my steps slow. But I am not a fool. I know the value of love, of loyalty, of sacrifice. And I know when those I raised with my own blood turn against me. The judge leaned forward. Do you have proof, Mrs. Lee, of these accusations? Margaret's breath caught. Proof. She had only her word against theirs. The letters Edward had written her, sat hidden at home, they might move hearts. But would they sway law? Before she could answer, Thomas rose from the back row. His voice shook. Your Honor, it's true. All eyes turned to him. Daniel scowled. Lydia's face went pale. Thomas swallowed hard. I've seen it myself. Daniel and Lydia have lied. They've spread stories about Mother to the neighbors, made her look weak when she isn't. They've pushed her to sell the house, not for her good, but for their own pockets. And I stayed silent too long. But I can't anymore. A gasp ran through the room. Margaret's tears spilled as she looked at her youngest son, her heart aching with both pain and pride. Daniel shot to his feet. He's lying! He's covering for her! But the judge banged his gavel. Silence. He turned to Thomas. And what of your mother's state of mind? Is she capable of managing her affairs? Thomas's voice steadied. She is stronger than any of us. She remembers more than we do. She's the only one who has held this family together, even while we tore it apart. Margaret's chest swelled with both sorrow and relief. At last, one of her children had spoken the truth aloud. The judge called for a recess, leaving the outcome still uncertain. But as the gavel fell, Margaret's shoulders eased slightly. For the first time in months, she felt a glimmer of vindication. Outside the courthouse, Lydia hissed at Thomas. You traitor! How dare you side with her? Thomas's jaw tightened. Because she's right, and you know it. Daniel glared, his face red with fury. This isn't over. We'll find another way. Margaret stood quietly, her shawl tight around her shoulders, her tears drying in the cold wind. She looked at them with sorrow, but also with newfound strength. You have shamed me before neighbors, before strangers, even before the law, she said softly. But you cannot erase the truth. You cannot erase who I am. Her voice hardened, her eyes bright with fire. And one day, you will answer for what you have done. That night, Margaret returned home exhausted but unbowed. She sat by Edward's portrait, whispering into the quiet. They sought to strip me of my name, my home, my dignity. But today, I stood, and I did not fall. Edward, the battle is not over, but the tide is turning. I feel it. And when the truth is fully revealed, it will burn through their lies like flame through straw. The candle flickered, casting her shadow long across the room. Margaret Lee, weary but unbroken, was ready for the next battle. After the guardianship hearing, the air in the village grew thick with gossip. Some now pitied Margaret more than ever, touched by Thomas's testimony. Others clung to Daniel and Lydia's story. muttering that Margaret was stubborn, clinging to a house that should already be sold. Everywhere she went, Margaret felt the split. A nod of sympathy here, a look of suspicion there. The whispers followed her like a shadow. But at home, she felt a new strength. Thomas visited more often now, helping with small chores, sitting with her by the fire in the evenings. Though guilt still haunted his eyes, Margaret found comfort in his presence. For the first time in years, she felt less alone. Yet Daniel and Lydia were not done. One evening, Margaret returned from the market to find strangers in her home. Two men, dressed in suits, were measuring the rooms, jotting notes on clipboards. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, her voice sharp. Daniel appeared from the parlor, calm and cold. "They're appraisers. We're preparing for sale." Margaret's face blanched. "Sale? The case is not decided. You have no right." Daniel cut her off. "Rights are a matter of interpretation. The house will go, Mother. You're only delaying the inevitable." Margaret's chest heaved. "This is my home. How dare you parade strangers through it, as though I were already gone?" Daniel's voice hardened. "If you truly cared about us, you'd let go. But you care more for your ghosts than for your living children." Margaret's tears welled, but her voice rang strong. "Better to care for ghosts who were faithful than children who betray without shame." The appraisers shifted uncomfortably, sensing the storm, before hurrying out. Daniel left with them, leaving his mother trembling with rage and grief. Later that night, Margaret confided in Thomas, her voice breaking. "They would sell it out from under me, Thomas. They would erase every memory of your father, every brick he laid, every dream he built. How can they be so cold?" Thomas's eyes filled with sorrow. "I don't know. They've lost themselves, Mother. But I won't let them destroy you." Margaret clasped his hand, her voice fierce despite her tears. "Then stand with me. When the time comes, do not falter again. Promise me." Thomas nodded, his grip tightening. "I promise." But Daniel and Lydia pressed harder. A week later, Margaret received a letter not from the court but from a debt collector. It claimed she owed hundreds in unpaid bills, debts she had never incurred. Her hands shook as she read it. "They're forging things now," she whispered. "They would bury me in lies until even the law cannot see the truth." She showed the letter to Thomas, who clenched his fists. "They've gone too far. We'll prove it's false. I'll help you, Mother. I swear it." Margaret's eyes shone with fragile hope. "Edward, do you hear? One child still remembers his heart." But Lydia's cruelty struck deepest. One afternoon, Margaret attended church, praying quietly in her pew. At the end of the service, the pastor approached her gently. "Mrs. Lee," he said, "some of your children have expressed concern. They tell me you wander at night, forget your way, leave the stove burning. For your safety, perhaps you should consider moving in with them." Margaret's face burned with humiliation. "It is not true. I have never." The pastor placed a hand on her shoulder, pity softening his eyes. "I only wish to help, but if what they say is true, you must be careful." Margaret's voice shook. "They twist even the church against me. Is there no place left untouched by their lies?" She left in tears, her dignity shredded before her neighbors yet again. That night, Margaret sat before Edward's portrait, her heart breaking. "My love, they poison even the sanctuary of God. They leave me no refuge, no peace. I feel myself drowning in their falsehoods. How much more must I endure before the truth is revealed?" Her tears fell, but behind them burned fury. "They think me beaten. They think me powerless. But they do not know the strength of a mother wronged. Edward, I will endure, and when the time comes, I will rise." Desperation grew in Daniel and Lydia. At the next court date, they arrived with stacks of papers claiming to show Margaret's forgetfulness bills left unpaid, letters unanswered, even medical notes suggesting decline. Margaret stared in disbelief as the lawyer spread them across the table. "These are lies," she cried, Forged, twisted, invented. But the judge's brow furrowed. If these documents are authentic, they raise concern. Margaret's heart sank. Even the law seemed clouded by her children's deceit. Afterward, outside the courthouse, Lydia approached her, voice dripping with mock sympathy. "You should give up, Mother. You're embarrassing yourself. Sign the papers, let us take the burden, and the suffering ends." Margaret's eyes blazed through her tears. "You call this suffering mine, but it is yours. You will live with the shame of what you've done. And when the truth comes, it will not be I who stands condemned." Lydia smirked. "We'll see." She turned and left with Daniel, their silhouettes sharp against the setting sun. That night, Margaret sat with Thomas in the kitchen. "They have the town, the church, even the court. How can I fight them?" Thomas leaned forward, his voice low but firm. "Because you have the truth, and I'll help you prove it. I've seen the papers, Mother. Some of those debts, they're mine, not yours. I'll tell the judge." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "You would sacrifice yourself?" Thomas nodded. "Better me than you. You don't deserve this." For the first time in months, Margaret smiled faintly, her hand covering his. "Edward, do you see? One child's heart still beats with yours." But even with Thomas's loyalty, Margaret knew the storm had reached its peak. Her children had dragged her dignity through mud, poisoned her community against her, and threatened her very home. The conflict had burned nearly everything away except her resolve. In the silence of the farmhouse that night, she whispered into the flames, "They believe they have won, but I will show them. The truth is my weapon, and when I wield it, their empire of lies will crumble." The candlelight flickered, casting her shadow long and fierce upon the wall. Margaret Lee was battered, humiliated, nearly broken, but she was ready. The climax was coming. The farmhouse was silent that night, except for the steady tick of the old clock in the hallway. Margaret sat at the kitchen table, her journal open before her. The pages were filled with months of pain, every lie, every insult, every betrayal. Her tears had stained the ink, but the truth was still there, written clear and sharp. As she turned the pages, a thought struck her. This was more than a diary. It was testimony. Every cruel word her children had spoken in her presence, every scheme she had overheard, every forged letter or humiliation she had endured, she had written it all. Margaret lifted her head slowly, her eyes burning with new resolve. "Edward," she whispered, "perhaps this is what you meant when you told me that truth would rise. My pen has kept it alive, and now it will be my weapon." The following week, the court reconvened. The judge had requested further evidence, and Daniel and Lydia arrived with yet more papers. Their lawyer exuded confidence, already preparing his closing remarks. Margaret entered quietly, her shawl draped across her shoulders, her journal clutched firmly in her hand. Thomas walked beside her, his face pale but resolute. When the proceedings began, the lawyer rose smoothly. "Your Honor, my clients have demonstrated their mother's decline. The evidence is clear. Guardianship is necessary, not out of malice, but out of love." Daniel and Lydia nodded solemnly, their faces the picture of dutiful concern. The judge turned to Margaret. "Mrs. Lee, do you have anything further to present?" Margaret rose slowly. Her voice trembled at first, but steadied as she held up her journal. "Yes, Your Honor, I have the truth." She opened the worn book, the pages fluttering. "For months, I have written everything my children have done. Every scheme, every insult, every attempt to strip me of my dignity. These pages hold their words, not mine." She began to read. Her voice carried across the courtroom, sharp and clear. "She'll never give in. Then we'll force her hand. We'll tell the lawyer she's lost her memory. People already believe it." Gasps rippled through the room. Daniel stiffened, his jaw tightening. Lydia shifted in her seat, her composure cracking. Margaret read another entry. "They laugh at me even in public, mock me before strangers. They call me weak, unfit. Yet I know every word, every cruelty. They mistake silence for surrender. The judge's eyes narrowed, his gaze moving from Margaret to her children. She read a final passage, her voice breaking but strong. They would even sell their father's letters, his watch, his memory, for coins. What greater betrayal can a child commit? The courtroom buzzed with murmurs. Daniel leapt to his feet. This proves nothing. Anyone can write lies in a notebook. But Thomas stood, his voice ringing. It's true. I heard them myself. I watched them bring appraisers, forge debts, spread lies in the village. I was silent too long, but I will not be silent now. What my mother wrote is the truth. Lydia's face flushed crimson. You traitor, she spat. The judge banged his gavel. Order! Margaret lowered the journal, her eyes wet but fierce. She looked directly at Daniel and Lydia. You thought me weak. You thought me blind. But I saw everything. I remembered everything. And now the world sees it too. Her children sat frozen, their carefully woven facade unraveling before the eyes of the court and the village. The judge leaned back, his expression grave. Mr. and Miss Lee, the evidence against you is troubling. If even a fraction of this is true, it is not guardianship you seek, it is control for selfish ends. Mrs. Lee may be aged, but she is not unfit. What I see before me is a mother who has endured cruelty beyond measure. Murmurs filled the courtroom. Some neighbors who had once whispered against Margaret now looked upon her with shame and regret. The judge turned to Margaret. Mrs. Lee, this court will not strip you of your rights. The petition for guardianship is denied. A hush fell, followed by a swell of gasps. Daniel's face twisted with rage. Lydia's eyes flashed, her mouth opening as if to argue, but no words came. Margaret's tears fell freely, but her voice was steady. Thank you, Your Honor. When the session ended, villagers approached her hesitantly. Mrs. Lee, I am sorry. We believed the lies, Mrs. James. We should have trusted you. Margaret smiled faintly, though sorrow lingered in her eyes. It is not too late to remember the truth. Let this be a lesson. Even a mother can be broken by lies, but she can also rise with the truth. Outside the courthouse, Daniel and Lydia cornered her. You humiliated us, Daniel hissed. You ruined everything, Lydia added, her eyes blazing. Margaret's gaze was steady. No, children, you ruined yourselves. You chose greed over love, lies over truth. Today, the mask fell away, and one day, you will regret what you've done not for me, but for yourselves. She turned to Thomas, her voice softening. And you chose the truth at last. May it guide you where your siblings have lost their way. Thomas bowed his head, ashamed but grateful. That evening, back at the farmhouse, Margaret sat once more before Edward's portrait. My love, she whispered, the truth has begun to rise. They sought to bury me under lies, but the light pierced through. I have defended our home, our memory, our love. The battle is not over, their bitterness will linger, but today dignity has won. She laid the journal beside Edward's letters, the two together forming the heart of her strength. The flames in the hearth crackled, reflecting in her eyes. For the first time in years, Margaret felt peace fragile but real. She had endured. She had risen. And though the scars would remain, she had turned the tide. The climax had begun. The days following the court's decision were strangely quiet. For the first time in months, Margaret could walk through the village without hearing whispers that cut like knives. People nodded respectfully again. Some even stopped to greet her, shame in their eyes for having believed the lies. But for Daniel and Lydia, the silence was suffocating. Their pride had been wounded before the whole community. No longer could they parade themselves as the noble, caring children. Now everyone looked at them with suspicion, with doubt. At the farmhouse, however, Peace did not last. One stormy evening, rain hammering against the windows, Margaret sat by the fire with Thomas. He was reading aloud from one of Edward's old letters, his voice halting but tender. My dearest Margaret, when the years grow heavy and the children are grown, remember this. Truth is the seed that endures. Plant it in their hearts, even if they forget. One day, it will bloom. Margaret's eyes glistened as Thomas folded the letter. Your father's words were always his greatest gift. I only wish your brother and sister could still hear them. Before Thomas could answer, the door burst open. Daniel and Lydia strode in, soaked from the storm, their faces twisted with fury. Daniel slammed the door behind him. Do you enjoy it, Mother? Do you enjoy humiliating us in front of the entire town? Lydia's voice was sharp, dripping venom. You've turned everyone against us. Our names are ruined. And you sit here, smug, clutching your dusty letters as though they make you a queen. Margaret rose slowly, her shawl falling around her shoulders. I did not ruin your names. You ruined them yourselves, with lies, with greed, with betrayal. Daniel stepped closer, his eyes burning. We gave you a chance to make this easy. You chose war. Don't think one court ruling will save you. We'll find another way. Margaret's gaze did not falter. Do you hear yourselves? You speak not as children but as enemies. You think of inheritance, of reputation, of power. Never once of love. Never once of honor. Thomas stood suddenly, placing himself between them. Enough! Can't you see what you're doing? She's our mother. She gave us everything, and all you've done is tear her apart. Lydia sneered. Oh, listen to the saint. You betrayed us in court, Thomas. You chose her over your own blood. Thomas's voice shook with anger. She is my blood, and you should be ashamed for forgetting that. Daniel snarled. You're weak, just like her. Margaret's voice cut through the storm. No, Daniel, strength is not in cruelty. It is in endurance. It is in truth. You mistake greed for power, but power built on lies collapses. For a moment, silence reigned, broken only by the thunder outside. Then Lydia hissed, You'll regret this, Mother. We'll see how long your dignity keeps you warm when the house rots around you. Margaret's eyes flashed. She stepped forward, her voice ringing with a force that silenced them both. This house will never rot, because it was built with love. Your father's sweat, my sacrifice, and yes, even the laughter of your childhood still live in these walls. You may despise me, but you cannot erase that. You cannot erase truth, and you cannot erase me. Daniel and Lydia faltered, their fury clashing against the unshakable fire in her eyes. You believe me weak because I am old, Margaret continued, her voice low and steady. But you forget. It was I who bore you, who fed you, who carried you when your legs could not. My body bent for you, my spirit endured for you. And now, you raise your hands not to honor me, but to destroy me. That is your shame, not mine. Thomas whispered, awe in his voice. Mother. But Margaret wasn't finished. She turned directly to Daniel. You forge papers, you drag strangers through my home. You speak of selling it as though I were already in the grave. And yet, for all your scheming, you cannot touch the one thing I hold, that you will never have your father's truth. His words live here. She pressed her hand to her chest. And they condemn you. Then she faced Lydia. You would sell even his letters, his memory, his love for coins. You think that makes you clever. It makes you hollow. One day, when the gold is gone, you will have nothing. No father's blessing, no mother's love, only emptiness. Lydia trembled, her face pale. Daniel's fists clenched, his jaw working furiously. But neither spoke. The fire crackled in the silence, the storm raging outside as though echoing the fury within the room. At last, Margaret's voice softened, though it cut deeper than any shout. You call me your enemy, but I am only your mirror. You despise me, because I show you what you have become. Daniel turned abruptly, storming out into the rain, Lydia close behind. The door slammed, shaking the house. For a long while, only the storm filled the silence. Then Thomas turned to his mother, awe and sorrow mingling in his eyes. You were magnificent, Mother. I've never heard you speak like that. Margaret sank slowly into her chair, her body trembling with exhaustion. Because I have held my tongue too long, Thomas. But no more. The truth has waited, and now it must be spoken. She clasped Edward's letters, her tears falling freely. Edward, if you could see, our children are lost, but I will not be. That night, as the storm quieted, Margaret wrote in her journal. They came with rage, but they left with silence. They cannot admit it, but they know the truth has unmasked them. Still, I fear their desperation. They are cornered now, and cornered children lash out. I must be ready, for the battle is not yet done. Her candle burned low, casting her shadow long across the wall. Though her body trembled, her spirit stood taller than ever before. The climax surged forward, and Margaret Lee was no longer merely enduring. She was fighting. The storm that raged that night seemed to seep into Daniel and Lydia's hearts. Days passed, and though they no longer came to the farmhouse, Margaret could feel their anger simmering in silence. She kept to her routines, but her body was restless, as though waiting for the next blow. Thomas remained close, helping where he could. He chopped wood, mended fences, even insisted on walking her to church. For the first time in years, Margaret felt the warmth of companionship in her own home. Yet beneath it all, she knew Daniel and Lydia were not finished. Her fears proved true. One morning, Margaret awoke to pounding on the door. When she opened it, two officers stood there with folded documents. "Mrs. Lee?" one asked. "Yes," she answered, her voice cautious. "You're hereby served with notice. Your property has been placed under lien, pending unpaid debts." Margaret's face blanched. "Debts? I owe nothing." The officer sighed. "Ma'am, I only deliver papers. You'll have to take it up with the court." They left, leaving her trembling with the document in her hands. She scanned the pages, endless numbers, signatures, and seals. All false, all forged. Her knees gave way, and she sank into the chair. They've done it. They've tried to bury me beneath lies once more. Thomas arrived minutes later, finding her pale and shaking. He read the document, his face darkening with rage. "This is Daniel's doing. He knows the judge won't take guardianship, so now he's pushing debts. They'll try to force a sale through the bank." Margaret's voice cracked. "They would drive me into ruin, Thomas, their own mother." Thomas gripped her shoulders. "We'll fight it. We'll prove it false." Margaret stared at him, her eyes full of sorrow and steel. "They will not stop until I am broken. But I am not broken yet. There is one truth they do not know, one truth that will end their greed forever." That evening, as the sun bled red across the fields, Margaret opened a drawer in her bedroom. From it, she drew a worn envelope, sealed with Edward's handwriting. She had guarded it for years, never speaking of its contents. She sat Thomas down at the table. "My son, this is your father's will. Not the one Daniel and Lydia believe exists, the one they think grants them equal shares. That document was only a draft. This," she placed the envelope before him, "is the true will, the one he signed with his own hand before he passed." Thomas's eyes widened. "All this time," Margaret nodded. "I kept it hidden, fearing what they might do. I prayed I'd never need to reveal it. But now, the time has come." With trembling fingers, she opened the envelope and unfolded the aged parchment. Edward's familiar script filled the page, his signature bold at the bottom. It read simply but firmly, "I leave the house and the land to my beloved wife, Margaret Lee, to hold and to keep until her last breath. Only upon her passing shall it be divided equally among the children, if they remain deserving. Thomas exhaled sharply. It's clear. Father left it to you without question. They have no right to sell it, no right to touch it. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. Edward foresaw their greed. He sought to protect me, and now his words will be my shield. The next day, when Daniel and Lydia arrived with smug smiles and a lawyer in tow, Margaret was ready. Mother, Lydia began smoothly, we hear you've received notice about the debts. Best to resolve them quickly. If you sign here, the sale can proceed quietly, and no one has to suffer more embarrassment. She slid a document across the table. Margaret stared at it, then at them. Her voice was calm, almost cold. You believe me cornered, but you are the ones trapped, Daniel snorted. You have nothing. The debts will crush you. Margaret rose slowly, laying Edward's will upon the table. Nothing? Then what is this? Their faces paled as their father's handwriting stared back at them. This, Margaret continued, her voice rising with power, is your father's true will. He left the house to me, solely to me, until my last breath. Not a coin, not a brick, not a field belongs to you while I live. And if you think otherwise, you betray not only me but him. Daniel's face flushed. This is a trick. It's real, Thomas said firmly. I've seen the seal, the signature, Father's hand, and I'll testify before any judge who asks. Lydia's lips trembled. You hid this? Margaret's eyes glistened with tears, but her voice was steel. I protected it, because I knew the day would come when greed would devour you. That day has arrived. For the first time, Daniel faltered. His bravado cracked, his voice uncertain. You can't keep it forever. One day it will still come to us. Margaret stepped closer, her eyes burning. One day, yes, if you remain deserving. But look at yourselves deceitful, cruel, faithless. Do you think your father would find you worthy now? Do you think his words were written in vain? He knew the measure of your hearts. And so do I. Lydia shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. No, this isn't fair. Margaret's tears fell too, but her tone was unyielding. Fairness ended when you betrayed your own mother. This is justice. The lawyer cleared his throat nervously, closing his briefcase. I can't proceed with this. The will is binding. Without contesting it formally, there's no case. Daniel turned on him. You coward! But the man only shook his head. I won't stake my name on lies. He left swiftly, leaving the siblings standing pale and furious. Margaret held the will against her chest, her voice soft but firm. Your father's words protect me still. You cannot touch what love has built. Leave now, before you lose even what little dignity remains. Daniel glared, his fists trembling, but Lydia tugged at his arm. At last, with a growl of defeat, they stormed out. When the door closed, Margaret sank into her chair, her strength spent. Thomas knelt beside her, tears in his eyes. You've done it, Mother. You've won. Margaret's hand trembled as she stroked his hair. No, Thomas. The battle is not victory. Love is victory. I have shown them the truth, but whether they learn from it, that is their choice. She looked at Edward's will, the firelight dancing across the ink. My love, your words saved me. But oh, how I wish they had saved them too. The night after Margaret revealed Edward's true will, the farmhouse felt different. The air was lighter, the walls warmer, as though Edward's spirit himself had returned to shield it. Thomas sat with his mother by the fire, the will carefully placed back in its envelope, resting between them like a guardian. You're safe now, Mother, Thomas said softly. They can't touch you any more. Margaret smiled faintly, though sorrow lingered in her eyes. Safe, yes, but they are not finished. Pride does not die easily. Daniel and Lydia will not accept defeat quietly. I fear what storm their bitterness will bring. Thomas shook his head. Let them rage. The law is on your side now. The whole town saw their lies fall apart. They have nothing left. But Margaret's heart was uneasy. She had lived long enough to know. When cornered, the desperate bite hardest. Her unease proved true. 2 nights later, as Margaret slept, she was startled awake by the sound of shattering glass. She sat up, clutching her shawl, heart racing. Downstairs, footsteps echoed, hurried, chaotic. "Thomas?" she called, but he was not there. He had gone home for the night. She rose, her candle trembling in her hand, and descended the stairs. There, in the parlor, Daniel stood with a lantern, his face twisted with fury. Beside him, Lydia clutched a bag, her hands shaking. The chest of keepsakes lay open, Edward's letters and watch strewn across the floor. "Daniel! Lydia!" Margaret gasped. "What are you doing?" Daniel's eyes blazed. "If we cannot have the house, then we'll take what remains. Father's things, the silver, anything worth a coin. We'll strip it all before you rot in it." Lydia's voice cracked. "We deserve something. You've taken everything from us." Margaret's tears welled. "I have taken nothing. It was you who cast aside love for greed. And now you would desecrate your father's memory? For what, a handful of coins?" Daniel kicked the chest shut with a violent thud. "You think you've won, Mother? You think that piece of paper makes you queen? You humiliated us before everyone. Now, we'll make sure you suffer." Margaret's voice rose, firm despite her trembling. "This house is not mine alone. It is Edward's. It is mine. And it is the spirit of every sacrifice we made. You cannot tear it apart without tearing your own souls to pieces." Daniel sneered. "Then so be it." He lifted the lantern, his eyes dark. For a terrifying moment, Margaret thought he meant to set the house aflame. "No," she cried, rushing forward. "Not your father's home." Lydia's hand caught his arm. "Daniel, stop! This is madness!" But his rage burned too hot. She deserves nothing less. At that moment, the door burst open. Thomas stormed in, his face pale with shock. "Daniel, put it down!" he shouted. Daniel froze, startled, but did not lower the lantern. "Get out of my way, Thomas. You chose her side, now pay the price." Thomas stepped forward, placing himself between Margaret and his brother. "If you want to burn this house, you'll have to burn me with it." Lydia gasped. "Thomas, don't." But Thomas's voice rang out, strong and clear. "I won't let you destroy our father's legacy, or our mother." Margaret's tears fell freely as she watched her youngest son stand firm. For years he had been silent, timid, unsure. Now he stood taller than both his siblings, his voice carrying the strength of generations. "Daniel," Thomas said, his voice steady, "look at yourself. Father would be ashamed. You think this will make you strong? Number. It makes you a coward. Only cowards destroy what they cannot control." Daniel's arm trembled, the lantern shaking in his grasp. His fury battled with doubt, his pride with shame. Margaret's voice joined her son's, soft but piercing. "Daniel, put it down. For once, listen not to your pride, but to your heart. Remember the boy who once laughed in this house, who ran through these halls, who kissed me good night. He is still in you. Don't kill him with this act." For a long, breathless moment, the storm raged outside, the house silent within. Then, with a strangled cry, Daniel hurled the lantern to the ground. It shattered, spilling light across the floor but sputtering out without flame. He sank to his knees, his chest heaving, his face buried in his hands. Lydia dropped the bag, tears streaming down her cheeks. "What are we doing? We've become monsters." Margaret's heart broke at the sight. She stepped forward slowly, her hand trembling as she reached for them. "My children, you are lost, but you are not beyond saving. It is not too late to turn back." But Daniel jerked away, his voice raw. "No, Don't pity me. I don't deserve it. Margaret knelt beside him, her frail hand resting on his shoulder. You deserve love, Daniel. Always love. It is your choices that have shamed you, not your soul. Change your choices, and love will remain. Lydia wept openly, covering her face. We've hurt you so much, Mother. How can you forgive us? Margaret's tears fell, her voice breaking. Because forgiveness is a mother's last weapon. You may wound me 1,000 times, but still I will love you. Still I will hope for you. Thomas lowered his head, his own tears falling. Mother, you are stronger than all of us. Margaret shook her head gently. Not stronger, Thomas. Just a mother. And that is enough. The storm outside began to quiet, the rain softening into a steady patter. Within the house, silence held them broken, humbled, yet alive. Margaret knew the scars would never vanish, but in that moment, she felt something shift. Daniel and Lydia, though far from redeemed, had glimpsed their own reflection in her mirror of truth. The battle was ending. Resolution was near. That night, after they had left, Margaret sat once more by Edward's portrait. The will lay safe on the table, but her gaze was on his painted eyes. My love, she whispered. Tonight our children nearly destroyed everything, but they did not. Truth held, love endured, and perhaps, just perhaps, they may yet find their way back. She folded her hands in her lap, weary, but at peace. The climax had reached its peak, and dawn was on the horizon. The dawn after the storm was unusually clear. The air felt washed, the fields glittering with dew. Margaret rose early, her body aching with the weight of years, but her heart lighter than it had been in months. She brewed tea quietly, the warmth filling the kitchen, the silence no longer heavy but calm. When Thomas arrived, he found her sitting by the window, Edward's will resting beside her. She looked up at him and smiled. It feels different today, she said softly, as though the house itself has forgiven. Thomas sat across from her, his eyes filled with tenderness. Because you forgave them, Mother, even when they nearly destroyed it all. Margaret sighed. A mother's forgiveness is not weakness. It is the last thread that binds a family, even when every other thread has broken. Later that week, Daniel and Lydia returned, not with papers, not with lawyers, but quietly, humbly. Their faces were drawn, their eyes weary. For a long time, they stood in the doorway, uncertain. Margaret looked at them without anger. Her heart still bore wounds, but her arms remained open. Daniel finally spoke, his voice low. Mother, I can't undo what I've done. The lies, the cruelty, the shame. I don't ask you to forget, but can you forgive me? Lydia's voice trembled. I thought I was strong, but I was only selfish. You were right. I sold our love for coins. Can you ever look at me without pain? Margaret rose slowly, her shawl draped around her shoulders. Tears glistened in her eyes. My children, she whispered, you have wounded me deeper than words can say. But if I can forgive, perhaps you can learn to forgive yourselves. Come in, sit. Let us begin again, even if the path is long. They sat at the table, the four of them together for the first time in peace. The silence was heavy, but not hostile, the silence of wounds beginning to heal. Margaret placed Edward's letters on the table. Your father wrote these not for me alone, but for all of you. They are his voice, his truth. If you wish to know the man you betrayed, read them, and perhaps you will find the path back to yourselves. Daniel's hands shook as he reached for one. Lydia bowed her head, her tears falling onto the parchment. Thomas watched silently, relief softening his face. Days turned into weeks, and slowly the house changed. Daniel and Lydia no longer stormed in with demands, but came quietly, sometimes helping with chores, sometimes simply sitting in silence. Trust did not rebuild overnight, but Margaret saw small glimmers, Daniel chopping wood with Thomas, Lydia mending a torn shawl, both avoiding her eyes but staying near. The village, too, shifted. Those who had believed the lies now greeted Margaret warmly, some even offering apologies. Mrs. Chen visited often, bringing fresh bread and guilt in her eyes. "Forgive us, Margaret," she said one morning. "We should have trusted you. We let their lies blind us." Margaret only smiled gently. "Do not burden yourself too much, Mrs. Chen. Even I, their own mother, struggled to see the truth in their eyes. What matters is what we choose now." One Sunday, Margaret stood in church again, her children beside her. Whispers rose, but this time they were not cruel, they were astonished. The family stood together, no longer enemies, but humbled and seeking peace. The pastor's voice carried through the sanctuary. "The Lord's mercy is greatest when we least deserve it. Forgiveness is not given because one is worthy, but because love refuses to die." Margaret's tears fell as she bowed her head. She understood now. Her battle had never been only about the house, or even her dignity. It was about love's endurance, even against betrayal. One evening, Thomas found her writing in her journal again. "What will you write now, mother?" he asked. Margaret smiled faintly. "Not their betrayals. I've written enough of those. Tonight, I write of hope. That though greed nearly destroyed us, truth endured. That though bitterness burned, love remained." She looked at him, her eyes tender. "And I will write of you, Thomas, the son who found his voice when I needed it most." Thomas's eyes shone with tears. "I only did what was right." Margaret reached for his hand. "Sometimes doing what is right is the hardest thing of all. And you did it." As summer deepened, Margaret spent her evenings on the porch, watching the sun set over the fields Edward had once tilled. Daniel sometimes sat beside her in silence. Lydia sometimes brought tea. They did not speak much of the past, but Margaret felt something softening in them, a quiet shame, a quiet yearning. One night, Daniel whispered, almost too low to hear, "Father would have been proud of you." Margaret turned her face toward him, tears glistening. "And I pray one day he will be proud of you too." Her final journal entry that year was simple. "I have lived through betrayal, humiliation, and despair. But I have also lived to see truth rise, love endure, and forgiveness take root. My children may stumble, but they are still mine. My husband's memory still breathes in these walls, and my own spirit, though aged, is unbroken. This is the legacy I leave, not wealth, not land, but the lesson that love survives even the darkest storms." The farmhouse stood tall against the horizon, no longer a battlefield but a sanctuary once more. Margaret Lee, frail in body but fierce in spirit, had turned the tide. She had taught her children and all who watched that while greed may wound, and lies may scar, truth and love endure. And in the quiet of her home, beside Edward's portrait, she finally found peace.